My father, myself, we all marched into that police station, gave blood, we gave hair, we gave fingerprints. The thing that really stuck with me is two detectives hand me their business cards, and one says narcotics officer and the other says auto theft. And I buried my head into my hands because I knew at that point we were in a bad spot.
The case of JonBenét Ramsey presents a narrative of profound tragedy, shrouded in enduring mystery. On the 26th of December 1996, the 6-year-old was discovered in the basement of her family home under distressing circumstances. The events of that Christmas night continue to be the subject of intense speculation, with central questions revolving around whether the incident was a kidnapping that went tragically wrong, or an act of violence that occurred within the household. The following account examines the observations of the family's housekeeper, Linda Hoffman, which offer a unique perspective on the dynamics within the Ramsey home. Before we analyze the suspicions in the case, please tell me where you saw this video from. I will read it all and spread it to the world. Outwardly, the Ramsey family, comprising JonBenét Ramsey, Patsy Ramsey, and their children Burke and JonBenét, appeared to epitomize success and the idyllic American family life. However, within the confines of their expansive residence, a more complex reality may have been unfolding. JonBenét was a bright and charismatic child, celebrated within her family and community. Her mother, Patsy Ramsey, a former beauty queen, placed great emphasis on appearance and the family's public image. JonBenét Ramsey, the father, was a successful business executive who provided for his family with a reserved authority. Their son, Burke, the elder sibling, while less of a focus in subsequent media attention, was an integral part of this seemingly perfect family unit. Yet, behind this carefully constructed facade, underlying tensions were reportedly growing. For Linda Hoffman, the family's long-serving housekeeper, these tensions were said to be increasingly apparent. Having been with the family for years, she had witnessed the nuances of their lives in a way few others had. She was not merely an employee, but an observer, a quiet presence who could perceive the fissures in the public image. Hoffman began to notice dynamics that were not part of the public narrative. She observed that Patsy, despite her poised exterior, was not the composed individual she appeared to be. Hoffman reported signs of significant emotional strain on Patsy, suggesting the weight of her own and societal expectations was taking its toll. More specifically, Hoffman noted Patsy's fluctuating moods, which could shift from affectionate to displays of intense frustration, sometimes directed at JonBenét over seemingly trivial matters. Having witnessed these patterns repeatedly, Hoffman grew concerned. Her suspicions deepened over time. She felt this was more than a mother under ordinary stress. Hoffman perceived layers of tension within the Ramsey household that were not immediately obvious. She described communication between John and Patsy as minimal, observing a perceived emotional distance between the couple who, though living together, seemed to inhabit separate worlds. John, often preoccupied with his work, appeared detached, while Patsy was consumed by the need to maintain an image of perfection, an effort that seemed to cause her considerable internal distress. Hoffman's role placed her at the center of the home's daily life, where she cleaned, organized JonBenét's clothes, prepared meals, and observed. Over time, she reportedly noticed a change in Patsy's demeanor. Days of high energy and cheerful management became less frequent, replaced by increasing irritability and a sense of being overwhelmed. Hoffman stated she witnessed how Patsy's temperament could become short without warning, and how she would express frustration towards JonBenét for minor issues. Hoffman came to believe there was a more troubling underlying issue than the pressures of motherhood or public life. She viewed Patsy as emotionally volatile, and no longer the composed woman she once was. It was not only the outward signs of stress that concerned Hoffman, but also moments of personal disclosure. Hoffman recalled a specific conversation that left a lasting impression on her. Patsy had allegedly taken her aside to ask for advice on a deeply personal matter concerning her marriage, something she felt unable to discuss with anyone else. This moment was profoundly unsettling for Hoffman, as it revealed a side of Patsy she had not seen before, a vulnerability and desperation that contradicted her poised public persona. For Hoffman, Patsy's words suggested she was struggling with a significant personal burden that she could no longer conceal. These observations led Hoffman to question if the problems in the Ramsey household were more severe than marital stress and tension, and whether Patsy's struggles had manifested in a more destructive way. In the days immediately preceding JonBenét's death, Hoffman noticed even more alarming signs. She described a palpable tension in the home and noted that Patsy was particularly on edge. Hoffman could not identify a specific trigger, but sensed a significant shift in Patsy's behavior, likening it to an atmosphere of mounting pressure. In the early hours of December 26, 1996, the life of JonBenét Ramsey was tragically cut short. Her death initiated one of the most intensely publicized and perplexing criminal investigations in modern American history, which to this day remains unsolved. On the evening of December 23, 1996, the Ramseys hosted their annual Christmas party. The house was filled with guests, food, and festive cheer. However, Hoffman, who was present throughout the event, sensed an undercurrent of tension. She described Patsy, the hostess, as being on edge, meticulously managing every detail and issuing sharp instructions to staff, appearing far from relaxed. This tension reportedly persisted throughout the evening. While guests enjoyed the celebration, Hoffman observed Patsy becoming more agitated, demanding perfection in all aspects of the party. The weight of Patsy's anxiety was palpable and appeared to affect her mood significantly. John, meanwhile, remained largely disengaged from the festivities. Hoffman sensed a growing distance between the couple, a silence that she interpreted as indicative of the state of their marriage. After the party concluded and the household retired for the night, the atmosphere seemed to change. Hoffman, finishing her work, would not know it was the last time she would see JonBenét alive. The following morning, JonBenét was found deceased in the basement. Her death sent shockwaves across the nation, and as the investigation commenced, numerous questions emerged. Was an intruder responsible, as the family initially claimed, or did the explanation lie within the Ramsey household itself? One of the most perplexing elements of the investigation is the ransom note. It is notable for several peculiarities that raise questions about its authenticity and purpose. A striking feature is the specific demand for $118,000, a figure that precisely matched the Christmas bonus John Ramsey had recently received from his company, Access Graphics. This amount is highly unusual for a ransom demand, which typically involves round figures. This detail has prompted speculation regarding how an external party could have known such a precise and private financial figure. Equally unusual is the note's length. Spanning nearly 3 pages with 385 words, it is far more verbose than a typical ransom note of 50 to 60 words. Forensic linguist James Fitzgerald compared its verbosity to a work of fiction, suggesting it may have been deliberately staged rather than a genuine demand for money. Further analysis by Fitzgerald indicated the note contained intentional misspellings and phrasing designed to imply the author was a non-native English speaker or part of a small foreign faction. However, he concluded these errors were likely fabricated to mislead investigators, further undermining the note's credibility. Adding to these suspicions, the note was written on paper from a notepad belonging to Patsy Ramsey using a pen found within the home. The discovery of what appeared to be a draft version of the note further deepens the mystery, as it seems improbable that an intruder would risk detection by spending considerable time inside the house to compose and refine such a lengthy letter. The note's placement on a back staircase, a location familiar only to those with an intimate knowledge of the household's layout and routines, reinforces the theory that the author was not a stranger. Another anomaly is the absence of any unidentified fingerprints on the note. Analysis revealed only prints belonging to Patsy Ramsey and investigators, which is inconsistent with the scenario of an external party having handled it. Handwriting analysis has also been a point of contention, with some experts identifying numerous similarities between Patsy Ramsey's handwriting and the script in the note. However, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation did not formally confirm her as the author, and other analysts have disputed this connection. The content of the note has also drawn scrutiny for its cinematic quality, containing phrases that echo lines from popular films such as Ruthless People, Ransom, Speed, and Dirty Harry. This suggests the author may have drawn inspiration from popular culture, a characteristic rarely observed in genuine ransom communications. Despite the note's explicit warning against contacting the police and the promise of a follow-up telephone call, no such call was ever received, which contradicts the typical pattern of behavior in abduction cases. The decision by the Ramsey family to contact the authorities immediately upon finding the note is also considered perplexing, as one might have expected them to await the promised call if they believed JonBenét was still alive and being held for ransom. Some investigators have speculated that the demand for $118,000 could be a cryptic reference to Psalm 118 from the Bible, hinting at a symbolic or religious motive, though this remains an unconfirmed theory. Finally, forensic expert Michael Baden remarked that he had never encountered a ransom note of this nature in his extensive career, describing its complex and verbose style as inconsistent with a typical extortion letter and suggesting it may have been crafted by someone within the household to divert suspicion. Another key piece of evidence that drew Linda Hoffman's attention was a Swiss Army knife. Hoffman recalled confiscating the knife from Burke, Patsy's son, after an incident of misuse. She had placed it for safekeeping in a closet near JonBenét's room. However, after JonBenét was discovered, Hoffman was taken aback to learn that this same knife had been found near the child in the basement. For Hoffman, this was no mere coincidence. She immediately suspected that only someone familiar with the home and with access to that specific closet could have retrieved it. The discovery of the knife near JonBenét further solidified Hoffman's belief that the tragic event was perpetrated by someone inside the household, not an intruder, as the knife should not have been easily accessible to an outsider. One of the most disturbing items of evidence was the garrote found at the scene, a chillingly effective instrument constructed from materials located within the Ramsey home. This makeshift device consisted of a nylon cord, likely sourced from Patsy Ramsey's art supplies, fashioned around JonBenét's neck. A broken 4.5-inch piece of a paintbrush, also from Patsy's art materials, served as a handle. The remaining portion of the brush was later found in her supply box. The construction of the garrote was notably sophisticated, employing specialized knots that suggested the creator possessed specific knowledge or skill, raising questions about their background. JonBenét was discovered with the cord still around her neck, her hands bound above her head, and duct tape placed over her mouth. The official cause of her death was determined to be asphyxia by strangulation, in addition to a cranial injury. The connection of the garrote to Patsy Ramsey stems primarily from the origin of its components. With both the cord and the paintbrush fragment traced to her personal art supplies, it suggests the device was assembled on-site rather than being brought in by an outsider. This detail has fueled suspicion, as it implies the perpetrator had intimate knowledge of and access to the household's contents. The specialized knots further complicate the narrative. It has been speculated that JonBenét Ramsey's interest in yachting might have exposed the family to sailing culture, but no direct evidence confirms Patsy possessed the expertise to tie such knots. Investigators, including forensic linguist James Fitzgerald, have pointed to elements of staging at the scene, with the garrot's complexity and use of household items suggesting the person responsible was likely a family member or someone intimately familiar with the home. Boulder police initially considered that Patsy may have created the garrot as part of a staged scenario to obscure the true circumstances of JonBenét's death, though no forensic evidence like fingerprints directly links her to the item. While the ransom note raised suspicions due to handwriting similarities, no conclusive evidence connects Patsy to the garrot's creation. Her behavior, such as calling the emergency services despite the note's threats, and being seen in the same clothes from Christmas Eve, added to the scrutiny and reinforced theories of her potential involvement in staging the scene. Nevertheless, the absence of definitive forensic links means any connection between Patsy and the garrot remains a matter of speculation. JonBenét was discovered in the basement's wine cellar, a rarely used room, wrapped in a white blanket. This blanket, believed to be from her bedroom or a common area, covered much of her, leaving her head and shoulders exposed. According to the autopsy report, the blanket was not tightly bound but loosely draped, suggesting it was placed to cover her post-mortem. The blanket's presence in the basement, an area JonBenét seldom visited, indicates a deliberate act of it being brought there from another part of the house. The act of wrapping JonBenét in the blanket has been interpreted by some investigators and forensic psychologists as a potential indicator of remorse or guilt, particularly if the perpetrator was someone close to her. Experts such as Stephen Pitt have noted that covering a victim's body, especially with an item associated with their comfort, is a behavior sometimes seen in cases involving a loved one. This act can reflect an emotional conflict within the perpetrator, who, after the event, seeks to symbolically care for the victim, an action less typical of a stranger. In this context, the blanket's use strengthens the hypothesis that the person responsible was intimately familiar with the household, possibly a family member. Suspicion has often centered on Patsy, as the blanket's origin as a household item suggests easy access for an occupant. Investigators like Steve Thomas have argued that the scene, including the blanket, showed signs of being staged to simulate a kidnapping and obscure the true events. The choice of a familiar blanket could indicate an attempt to create an impression of affection, thereby diverting suspicion. Patsy's subsequent actions further fueled speculation that she may have acted instinctively out of guilt following a tragic accident or impulsive act. Psychological analyses, including insights from former FBI profiler John Douglas, support the idea that the blanket's use points to an emotional connection between the perpetrator and JonBenét. As her mother, Patsy would fit this profile. However, alternative theories, such as those proposed by Detective Lou Smith, suggest an outside intruder might have used the blanket to delay discovery. This view is less widely accepted due to the lack of corroborating evidence of a break-in. While the blanket's presence raises compelling questions about the perpetrator's mindset, no forensic evidence directly links Patsy to its placement, leaving its significance as a haunting but unresolved clue. From Linda Hoffman's perspective, the most telling aspect of the entire incident was the manner in which the scene appeared to have been staged. She noted that the emergency services were not contacted immediately after JonBenét was discovered missing. Instead, a complex narrative suggesting a kidnapping was constructed. In Hoffman's view, the detailed ransom note, the presence of the Swiss Army knife, and the careful placement of JonBenét in the basement were all elements that indicated a calculated attempt to conceal the true circumstances of her death, rather than the chaotic aftermath of an impulsive act. Hoffman felt that the actions taken were careful and methodical, ensuring the scenario seemed plausible to law enforcement. The person responsible knew the house intimately, where items were stored, where to find the necessary materials to stage the scene, and where to place JonBenét in a concealed part of the basement not easily found by visitors. This location was one only someone deeply familiar with the house would know. Forensic analysis of the scene reinforced Hoffman's suspicions. The lack of any signs of forced entry, combined with the meticulous arrangement, pointed towards someone with intimate knowledge of the home. For Hoffman, the evidence from the scene and the absence of a confirmed intruder painted a clear picture. The items used, the note, and the positioning of JonBenét all suggested involvement from within the family. Her conclusion was that Patsy was responsible for JonBenét's death and had subsequently staged the scene to appear as a botched kidnapping. Linda Hoffman's observations provide an insider's view of a family that was, in her opinion, far from the idealized image they projected. Through her eyes, one can begin to examine the deeper layers of mystery surrounding JonBenét's death. As previously mentioned, a significant observation made by Hoffman was the family's dedication to maintaining an outward appearance of perfection. Their wealth, beautiful home, and public image as a well-adjusted, successful family masked what she sensed was deep, emotional turmoil beneath the surface. Patsy Ramsey, a former beauty queen and a consistently poised mother, was, in Hoffman's view, particularly driven by the need to uphold this perfect family image. Over time, however, Hoffman noticed cracks in this facade, especially in Patsy's demeanor. She believed Patsy's struggle with this pressure was intrinsically tied to her identity. Having been a beauty queen, Patsy was accustomed to admiration, both for her own appearance and for her family's image as the epitome of success. But Hoffman watched as this perfectionism seemingly took a toll on Patsy's mental well-being. She would often become agitated when things were not exactly right, and the stress of managing the family's public persona was evident. Hoffman recalled numerous instances where Patsy's attempts to maintain appearances led to her becoming irritated over minor details that seemed insignificant to an outsider, but were of monumental importance to her. For Hoffman, these were unmistakable signs that Patsy was managing not just a family, but an identity that was beginning to unravel. As she continued to observe the household, Hoffman perceived a disconnection between Patsy and JonBenét Ramsey that was difficult to ignore. While they presented a united front publicly, she could see an emotional distance between them. John, the successful businessman, seemed emotionally unavailable. Hoffman observed that their marriage appeared to lack warmth. The couple rarely displayed physical affection or shared intimate moments. While Patsy often tried to uphold the image of a perfect wife, John remained, in Hoffman's eyes, distant and absorbed in his work. Hoffman, as a close witness to their daily lives, sensed this was a deep-seated issue that colored their interactions. She felt Patsy yearned for emotional support from her husband but rarely received it, and that this perceived neglect exacerbated the other pressures she was facing. Hoffman saw how the tension between the couple contributed to a growing instability in the house, which she believed played a role in the tragic events of that Christmas. In addition to her marriage, Patsy was under intense pressure to be the perfect mother. JonBenét had been introduced to the world of child beauty pageants at a very young age, and for Patsy, this was connected to her own identity. She placed enormous pressure on JonBenét to be the ideal child, meticulously planning every detail of her life, from her clothing to her behavior. JonBenét's success was a reflection of her own. However, the stress of parenting a child in the public eye began to show. Hoffman recalled how Patsy would react when JonBenét had small accidents, such as wetting the bed. What was a natural occurrence for a child seemed to provoke a disproportionate reaction from Patsy, who may have viewed it not as a simple mistake, but as a sign of imperfection in the world she had carefully constructed. For Hoffman, this appeared to be a tipping point for Patsy's fragile emotional state. The final events unfolded on the night of December 25, 1996. Hoffman's suspicion that Patsy was capable of something darker than maternal frustration was solidified. Having seen how her temper could escalate when her sense of control was threatened, Hoffman theorized that the bedwetting incident that night may have been the spark that ignited months or even years of suppressed anger and frustration. She believes that in a moment of overwhelming pressure, the cumulative stress of maintaining a perfect family image and the perceived emotional neglect from her husband, Patsy reached a breaking point. Hoffman theorizes that in a fit of rage, Patsy may have acted in an unthinkable way. This belief that the actions were fueled by a momentary loss of control was key to her understanding of the events. That night, control was lost, with catastrophic results. As Hoffman processed what she had witnessed and pieced together the details, she came to the grim conclusion that Patsy had caused JonBenét's death in a moment of rage and then concealed it. Her conviction remained unwavering. She believed an emotional breakdown led to an act that could not be undone. The cover-up, creating a false narrative, crafting the ransom note, and staging the scene was, in her view, all part of an effort to protect herself and preserve the idealized image of the Ramsey family. One highly speculative scenario suggests the events began in a moment of anger, accidentally causing a tragic outcome for her daughter, triggered by the bedwetting incident. In this reconstruction of events, a frustrated Patsy roughly handled JonBenét in the bathroom to change her, during which an altercation resulted in JonBenét falling and striking her head, sustaining a severe injury. Panicking, Patsy repeatedly and unsuccessfully tried to revive her. To conceal the incident, it is hypothesized she carried JonBenét to the basement while she considered her next steps. After some time, she concluded that staging a kidnapping was the best option to protect her family and reputation. Deciding to keep the truth from her husband, she meticulously drafted a ransom note, unaware that earlier versions left impressions on the notepad beneath. Returning to the basement, she made a final attempt to rouse JonBenét, who remained unresponsive. Overwhelmed, it is theorized that Patsy then used a paintbrush from her art supplies to fashion a garrote, using the device in a manner that would reinforce the appearance of an intruder's attack. In this speculative scenario, it is theorized that bindings were applied to JonBenét's wrists and tape was placed over her mouth, a process which may have inadvertently transferred fibers from clothing worn at Christmas. It is further hypothesized that JonBenét was moved to the wine cellar, a location believed to be unlikely for discovery, and a suitcase was positioned beneath the basement window to suggest an intruder's point of entry, though the intact cobwebs on the windowsill were overlooked. To create the impression of a male intruder and further distance herself from the events, it is suggested that part of the paintbrush used in the garrote was used to inflict additional injuries, leaving behind wooden fragments that match the device's handle. It is proposed that upon seeing her daughter on the cold floor and noticing a physiological reaction to the strangulation, Patsy retrieved a nightgown and a blanket. Unable to change the clothes due to the tight bindings, she purportedly placed the nightgown beside JonBenét, wrapped her in the blanket, and after a time returned upstairs. The performance, as this theory posits, began when she discovered the ransom note, woke John, and contacted the police. Her behavior during the subsequent investigation appeared erratic to some observers, raising suspicions. When JonBenét Ramsey discovered JonBenét, a silent exchange with Detective Linda Arndt allegedly led him to suspect his wife's involvement. Despite this, It is theorized that John chose to protect Patsy, leaving the full reality of the events unresolved. The tragic and baffling death of JonBenét Ramsey, a case that has captivated global attention for over 2 decades, remains an enigma. Despite numerous investigations, one of the biggest mysteries still revolves around who was responsible. Was it an intruder, as initially believed, or was it someone much closer to home? For years, investigators and amateur sleuths have attempted to piece together the puzzle, yet a definitive answer remains elusive. The most significant question persists. Was Patsy Ramsey involved in her daughter's death? Many aspects of the case fuel ongoing debate. The presence of a ransom note, the circumstances of the discovery in the basement, and the lack of clear evidence of a forced entry all raised more questions than answers. Patsy's behavior in the aftermath, including a delay in contacting emergency services, further complicated matters. While the intruder theory was initially prominent, the idea of family involvement gained traction as details from the scene emerged, and Patsy, visibly distraught, became a primary person of interest. However, with no direct evidence linking her, the question of whether a mother could be responsible for such an act remains a central point of contention. Linda Hoffman, the family's housekeeper, became an essential figure due to her unique insight into the Ramsey household. Her testimony, however, has not been without controversy. Hoffman held a strong belief that Patsy was responsible, a suspicion arising not from direct evidence, but from her observations of the family dynamic. Patsy's emotional volatility, her struggle to maintain a perfect image, and her actions following JonBenét's death. However, this testimony has been met with skepticism. Some critics argue that Hoffman's personal feelings, particularly after she herself was briefly considered a person of interest, may have influenced her views. They suggest a vested interest, pointing to her involvement in a book about the case. The memoir written by John and Patsy Ramsey, The Death of Innocence, serves as their account of the events. The book's primary purpose was to counter accusations against them while condemning what they saw as a mishandled police investigation and distorted media coverage. Through alternating chapters, the book recounts the events of that Christmas and the following morning, delving into their family life, John's business ventures, and Patsy's battle with ovarian cancer. The memoir provides the Ramseys' perspective on the investigation, sharply criticizing the Boulder police for allowing the scene to be compromised and for focusing on the family without substantial evidence. The authors denounce the media for tarnishing their reputation and spreading misinformation. A strong undercurrent of Christian faith runs through the narrative, with the Ramseys emphasizing how their beliefs sustain them. Key themes include their assertion of innocence, the investigation's failures, and the media's damaging role. Personal anecdotes reveal John's earlier loss of his eldest daughter in a car accident and clarify that JonBenét's pageant involvement was not the central focus of her life, contrary to media depictions. The book includes a photo section with candid images to counter the sensationalized pageant pictures and John's speculative profile of the perpetrator. It concludes with advice for parents on protecting their children. Critics, however, question whether Linda Hoffman's claims were motivated by a desire for notoriety or financial gain. Hoffman has always maintained her sole intent was to uncover the truth, believing that evidence such as Patsy's handwriting, her behavior, and her knowledge of the house suggested a level of involvement that could not be ignored. Yet the conflict surrounding her motivations adds to the case's complexity. Despite the many theories, the JonBenét Ramsey case officially remains unsolved. In 2008, following the development of new DNA testing techniques that found an unknown male's DNA on JonBenét's clothing, the Boulder District Attorney's Office formally apologized to the Ramsey family, stating they were no longer considered suspects. In the years that followed, no one was charged, And while the investigation is officially inactive, many continue to hope it will one day be resolved. Over the years, the media has remained captivated by the story, with documentaries and books continuing to fuel public speculation. Despite this ongoing interest, no new evidence has emerged to definitively identify the person responsible. The case endures as one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in American criminal history, leaving the public and the family with more questions than answers. Linda Hoffman continues to believe that Patsy Ramsey was responsible for the death of JonBenét. In interviews, Hoffman has spoken with certainty, asserting that the circumstances point to a mother who, in a moment of emotional breakdown, committed an unthinkable act. Her conviction, based on circumstantial and behavioral evidence, remains unchanged, despite the lack of definitive proof. For Hoffman, the puzzle is clear, even if the authorities and the public remain unconvinced. As this examination of the case concludes, one thing is certain: the unanswered questions will likely remain. Despite years of investigation, theories about an intruder or family involvement remain unproven. For the Ramsey family, the lack of closure has been a source of constant pain. John and Patsy, though initially under suspicion, have never been conclusively linked to the crime. Patsy passed away in 2006 without seeing a resolution for her daughter. JonBenét Ramsey, despite being cleared of any wrongdoing, has never fully escaped the shadow of suspicion. The case remains unresolved, and the full truth of what happened that night may never be known. Was it a tragic accident, a deliberate act of violence, or a family secret that was never revealed? The death of JonBenét continues to haunt those closest to the case, and the questions surrounding it remain. The Ramsey family story is one of heartbreak and the inability to know what truly happened in the early hours of that Christmas morning in 1996. While for Linda Hoffman the truth is clear, the world may never know for certain. The evidence may never be strong enough to bring charges, and the answers sought may remain locked away. The JonBenét Ramsey case stands as a tragic reminder that not all mysteries are solved. Some truths may forever be buried beneath layers of doubt and speculation. Patsy Ramsey's behavior and statements have long drawn scrutiny, with many pointing to a series of unsettling coincidences that have raised questions. In The Death of Innocence, the book she co-authored with her husband Patsy recounts a chilling moment on Christmas Eve 1996. While preparing gifts, she retrieved JonBenét's My Twin doll from a shipping carton in the basement. Upon opening it, Patsy was struck by what she described as a horrible feeling, saying the doll, with its closed eyes, looked like JonBenét lying in a coffin. She wrote that she had to blink several times to shake the disturbing image. John also noted she shared this observation with him that night. The fact that she had this thought hours before JonBenét's death, followed by the child's funeral days later, strikes many as an eerie coincidence. After all these years, after the evidence has been analyzed and the theories debated, we are left standing in the shadow of an immeasurable loss. A young girl's life, full of promise, was extinguished in the place she should have been safest. As you reflect on the complex web of clues, the family's pain, and the enduring mystery, how does this story settle within you? Does it leave you with a sense of frustration at a justice system's failures, a deep sadness for a family, fractured by tragedy and suspicion, or a renewed conviction to seek truth, no matter how deeply it is buried? What will you carry away from the memory of JonBenét Ramsey?